Hey everyone, welcome to another 360 overview video. And in this video, I want to look at Azure Data Box. A lot of people have been asking about this, and it's really about the challenge of today. You have services on premises, and I have a massive amount of data. This could be data from databases that's partitioned, sharded over multiple instances. It could be files, it could be virtual hard disks. And my goal is, well, I want to get it up to the cloud. So in the cloud, I can use the various types of resource that are available, but it means I have to get the data up to there. So how do we do this? Now, in an ideal world, I would just have some kind of network connectivity. So I have the network. That might be a site-to-site VPN. It might be express route. Maybe I'm just using a public endpoint. And I'm going to send the data over the wire. But the challenge can come down to, well, just how much? So what is the kind of the size of the data? What is its rate of change? What is my pipe? So how big is that actual bandwidth I have up to the cloud? How much time do I have? Hey, you have to get this. Maybe I could copy it over that wire, but it would take 5 years. Given the initial amount of data, maybe the rate of change, it's going to take me 5 years to ship that data. Maybe not a good solution. And then also it does come down to the technology. Because if you think about whatever is running here, if it's still running while I'm doing the copy, well, as the change happens, do I just send the changes after each iteration of copy, which the change will get smaller and smaller every time? Do I write the change up here as I write the change here? So by the time the copy is completed, it's up to date. So there are challenges around this. But for some organizations, this over the wire is just not practical. Maybe there's so much data. Maybe it's a facility where I have a network connection, but it's pretty small and I can't invest in a bigger pipe. So that's where Data Box comes in. So Data Box, there's different types of Data Box. There's Data Box disk, individual disks to copy data. But I'm really going to focus on kind of the regular Azure Data Box, which is this 7U unit. And there's also a kind of Data Box Heavy. So Data Box Heavy, as the name suggests, is this kind of 500-pound behemoth. I think it's like 4 foot by 2 foot by 2.5 feet. This big thing you wheel into the data center and you plug it in. So the idea of these is they are kind of offline. They get delivered to your data center, you plug the thing in, you copy the data to it, and you send it back where that data is read into storage accounts. So it's all offline. So there's a period of time where things are still running. So that's why I might still use the network to catch up from that offline movement of the data, or maybe I do multiple passes of using the data box. So my point for this video is, sure, that understands exactly what data box is. But I want to walk through kind of the overall process of what to expect. So we can think about, we have Azure. So we have this great big cloud that is the Azure set of services. Now, in reality, those services are exposed through multiple regions. And I can really think about a region is made up of multiple data centers. In some regions, they're exposed as availability zones. So I've got independent cooling, power, communications, etc. But essentially, I have these physical kind of buildings, these facilities. And it's through those we get services delivered to us. Now I can think about, well, sure, I have all these various data centers. And maybe through Azure in this region, I've created, hey, I've got a storage account 1, and maybe I've got a storage account 2. I might have 3, 4, 5, etc. You kind of get the idea. And my goal is I have a great big amount of data on premises here that I want to get up to there. Now, again, this might be in multiple phases. It might be, hey, I do a bulk copy offline, and then I'll do some online catch-up. That's fine. But I want to kind of focus on, well, what is the process to use DataBox or DataBox heavy? So I can think about, hey, I'm this user at my local kind of data center. So this is my on-premises data center. And I want to use DataBox. So the way this works is kind of step 1. So step 1 is I go to the Azure portal. So I'm using the portal. And basically I go in and I request DataBox or DataBox heavy. And what this is actually going to do is through the portal, it's going to go ahead and create a job. So a job is for one DataBox, regular or heavy. This is linked to a certain subscription. And what I do at this point, I select the type of DataBox. So I'm just going to say, hey, I'm picking a regular kind of DataBox here. But again, the process is exactly the same if it's heavy. So I've got my DataBox. Now in that job, I'm going to say, hey, I want to expose these certain storage accounts to it. So I'm going to say I want storage account 1 and storage account 2. What it's then going to do, this is during the provisioning of this data box, it is essentially going to project into the data box each of the storage accounts. And the way it's going to do it, it's going to create shares. Now it's going to create a share for each of the types of storage supported. So if it's a general purpose storage account, then I'll see a share created for block blobs. I'll see a share created for page, and I'll see a share created for file. Now I can also do managed disk import. And again, I'm focusing on importing to Azure. You can use the same process to get data out of Azure. So I would see these shares for storage account 1. If I also selected I want to go to managed disk, I would see additional shares for standard HDD, standard SSD. I'll see the different types of managed disk. And I'm also projecting storage account 2. So once again, I'll get kind of the same shares again for kind of the block, page, and file. So I'm seeing those basically projected onto that. So this is all getting ready to then it could ship to your premises to use it. Now, obviously, we want encryption on this thing. So the way this is going to work is it gets encrypted with a key. So I can think about, hey, definitely this is all encrypted. And it's encrypted using AES 256. Now, by default, it's going to use a Microsoft managed key. Now, you may have your own key vault and you want to use a customer managed key. So once I've gone ahead and created the job, and again, the job is one data box. After I've created the job, I can clone it to get multiple data boxes. But I might also have over here, hey, I've got an Azure key vault. So that's my Azure key vault where I can store keys. So I can absolutely use a customer managed key. So I can say, hey, actually, I want to use my own key for that encryption. So I'm going to use a customer managed key. Now, if I do that, on that key vault, I have to, one of the settings we can do, so if I think about my key vault here, I have to allow Microsoft trusted services. Because obviously I'm going to have to be able to read the data back. So yes, I can use my own key for that encryption. In terms of the size, if I'm using regular data box, the size is going to be 100 terabytes with 80 terabytes usable. Because obviously, yes, certain types of RAID, etc. Usable. If it's heavy, so that's just data box. If I do heavy, then it's 1,000 terabytes, and I think it's 770 terabytes usable. So again, you use a bit in the RAID that helps keep the data if there's a disk failure or something. This is then locked. So what happens is, as part of this job, there's actually a credential used. There's a credential in here, and this is locked. So during transit, it's locked. If someone got the device, they can't do anything with it. And now, in kind of step 2, I can think about, well, now it gets shipped over. This gets shipped to you. So it's in a lorry. I can't draw a lorry. I really can't draw a lorry. That gets delivered to your data center. Now, if it's regular data box, this is kind of UPS, and I can kind of think about it as overnight. If it's heavy, then it's shipped kind of freight, and it might take 7 days. It's going to take 7 days to ship back, whereas this. So regular data box is going to be much faster. It's overnight kind of shipping to actually get that. Now, once it arrives, by default, you have 10 days. So that time starts once it's delivered to your data center, and it stops once it's picked up from your data center. Now, you can get additional time. I think you can pay a daily charge to have it for an extended amount of time. Now, at this point, the data box is now on your network. The first thing you actually have to do is, some machine here, you have to set up a special IP address. I think it's a 192.168.100. So I'm going to use 192.168.100, and I think it is .10. So I have to connect to this. So I connect to it through a management. There's multiple NICs. One of them is a management NIC. Now, in this job, remember I said it was locked? There is also this unlock credential. So I would go to the Azure portal. I have permissions to the job, and it would tell me what the unlock basic password is. Through this, I open up a portal on the local data box. I would type in that credential. That will now unlock this device. So now it's going to be unlocked. Now I can actually start using it. So again, I would plug in multiple data connections to this thing. There's like 10 gig connections. If it's heavy, it's actually 2 separate nodes in the single unit. Each node would have the same set of shares available to it. It can use DHCP for those data connections, and once the data connections are enabled, I can get to the management interface through the data connection IP addresses as well. So great, I've done this, I've connected to it, I've unlocked it, I've kind of set up the data NIC configuration. I've obviously got the management NIC as well. Now I can actually start copying data to it. Now, if I think about what I can use, so this data box is now sitting essentially in my data center here, and I've got my various sources. So how exactly can I copy to the data box? So it really supports 3 different things to get data to it. I can think about, well, okay, I want to copy data from here to that data box. I can use SMB, I can use NFS, and I can use REST. So the 3 protocols. So those shares, the block, the page, the file for each storage account, or if it's managed disk, I'll see additional shares for standard SSD, etc., etc. Support SMB, NFS, and REST. Now, if I'm using SMB as part of this management portal and through the Azure portal, there are credentials that I use to authenticate when I map the share. Also, if I use SMB3, I can do encryption on the wire. Now that has to come from the client. The client has to say, hey, I'm going to use SMB3 and I want to use encryption. Then that will be encrypted over the wire. If I use NFS, I can do IP restrictions. So what I do is through that management portal, I say only these IP addresses are allowed to actually go and connect, but it is not encrypted. The NFS, there's no option to encrypt over the wire, but I can restrict which IP. There's also no credentials. It's just through the management interface, I say which IPs are allowed to connect via NFS. If I use REST, there's actually kind of an account key. So there's a key, once again, I get from the portals that I put in as part of the REST connection. And through REST, I can opt to use HTTPS. So then it would be encrypted over the wire. So those are the ways I can actually copy data to the data box. SMB, there's shared credentials, and I can use SMB3 with encryption, travel over the wire. NFS, I enable the IPs that are allowed to copy to it, but there's no over the wire encryption. REST, there's an account key, and if I use HTTPS, then it's encrypted over the wire. So essentially, I copy. I copy data to the various shares on the data box using any combination of those protocols. I can have multiple machines at the same time copying to the data box. Now, obviously, there's a certain amount of bandwidth. I think for SMB shares, it's about 1 gigabyte per second. If it's object, I think it's 700 megabytes per second. For Databox Heavy, I think it's 1.5 gigabytes per second for SMB, but it's still 700 for object storage. So essentially, I can pump a huge amount of data into the data box through those shares, and I'm filling it up. As we are copying the data, so as we're copying that stuff, one of the things it's actually doing is for each file, it's doing a CRC16 kind of digest. Sorry, not 16, 64. Oops. A CRC64 kind of hash of the file being copied. So what that's used for is when this eventually gets read back in at the Azure Data Center, it can compare the file that it's imported in to that kind of checksum and make sure it matches. So we know there's been no corruption to the file in any way. So every file as it's copied, there's this kind of CRC64 generated for it. Okay, so now we've copied all our data. We've filled up the data box with stuff. So essentially now the data box gets shipped back to the Azure Data Center. So once again, it's a terribly drawn lorry. Again, UPS, if it's regular data box, overnight. If it's data box heavy, it's freight, 7 to 8 days it's going to take to actually get that thing shipped back. So now it arrives at the data center. So now what happens is essentially that data box is attached to a separate network, but it is an Azure backbone network. It's not going over the internet or anything like that. The technicians that actually go and unbox this thing from the packaging and plug it in have no access to keys or anything else. They just log a job that basically says, hey, it's back. At this point in Azure, there's kind of this automation. So an automation is kicked off. So this automation kicks off, and this is kind of a per instance, so a per job VM. So it's not shared between anything else. This goes and connects to it. Now at this point, if you use a customer managed key, this is why I had to allow Microsoft Trusted Services. This job has to go and get the key so it can decrypt the data. So it's now going to connect to it. It does some checks to make sure it's not being messed with in any way. And then, well, all the data on those shares, it's essentially going to bring that data and write it to the storage account, the equivalent. If it was managed disks, it puts it to a page blob in the interim and then converts them to managed disk. Again, this is all on the Azure network. There is no internet used. It's all using HTTPS, so it's all encrypted on the wire, even on that Azure backbone network. And essentially now, it's taken all the data and it's put it into your storage accounts. Once it's finished, once that all the copying is complete, it's verified those CRC64s. If there were any errors, there's actually like a log in the job. it would log those to the job, say, hey, this file had a problem, couldn't read this in. Once it's finished, it is scrubbed. Now it is scrubbed to NIST, I have to check the exact value, SP888 Rev 1. So that is kind of the scrubbing that's used. That's kind of the government standards to make sure no one can get that data off. If these are hard disk drives, multiple erasures, so you cannot go and get the data back when it goes to the next customer. So it's scrubbed to those standards, and you're done. You can now go and look at your storage account, and all the data is there. So again, this is a tool. This is, hey, I have data, I want to get into Azure. Maybe I can do some over the wire. Maybe for bulk of it, I do it offline and I'm copying over the wire other things to it. But that is essentially Azure Data Box, how that works. I hope this was useful. As always, if it was, please kind of like, comment, share, and subscribe. Till next time, take care.